This group led by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has filed a brief with the U.S. Supreme Court to stop the Trump administration from ending DACA protection for immigrants. This isn't the first time that corporate groups have gone after the Trump administration on the issue of immigration. And tonight, we'll tell you about the motivation of why they're doing it, the motivation of the Chamber of Commerce and their friends. Also tonight, we'll take a look at some fishy financing that landed the late sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein over $200 million after he'd already been convicted as a pedophile. And later in the show, we'll talk about the sentencing of former Dallas police officer Amber Geiger for the murder of Both and Jean in his own apartment. Don't go anywhere. America's Lawyer starts right now. The Supreme Court will hear arguments in November about the Trump administration's decision to end DACA protection for children of illegal immigrants. And business groups, well, they're not happy about it. But it isn't because they love humanity so much, I can promise you that. I have Farron Cousins from Trial Lawyer Magazine with me to explain why these groups are so chummed up about this. He's written about it. He knows a lot about this topic. Let's talk about it, Farron.
Well, you know, this basically, it doesn't just start with Trump, actually. This goes all the way back to the Bush administration. Around 2006, the Bush administration was working on a big immigration overhaul. They wanted to get rid of illegal immigrants. They wanted to, really crack down on it because that's what the Republican base loves to hear. So at that time, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce came in, and I believe it was Tyson Foods.
It was Tyson.
They came in with the chamber and said, listen, Bush administration, we appreciate what you're doing here, but we need these people. And so fast forward now 13 years, they're having to do the same thing with the Trump administration. They say, look, we understand, Mr. Trump, this is what you ran on. You want to, crack down on immigration. But the truth is, we have to have these people. And we're the ones who fund a lot of the campaigns on both the left and the right. And this is why nothing ever gets done about immigration.
You got these loonies. You got really these loonies that are saying, oh, my gosh, isn't this wonderful? They're finally showing a human side. Let me tell you what's not human. Let me tell you, it's anything but human is the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the Business Roundtable. Now, you got to understand, those are the people that are saying, now we want to test the immigration policy. It doesn't have anything to do with decency. It has to do with cheap labor, okay? These are the same people, the Business Roundtable. I got to tell you, if you attach anything ugly that's happened in the United States in the last 25 years, you will always see the Business Roundtable, whether it's the burn down in burn down in Wall Street where nobody got prosecuted, whether it's a bad environmental movement that's taking place, whatever it is, taking advantage of consumers, the pharmaceutical industry, doing every day what they do, and that is to play all the games against the interest of consumers. Anytime you see something really ugly going on, you will always find the Business Roundtable and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Most people, Farron, don't even know what the Business Roundtable is. Tell us about it.
Well, this is a group that's been around since the 70s, and they came about from all the corporate leaders similar to U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And their original goal, or at the time their biggest project, was we're going to weaken labor laws. We're going to get rid of labor unions. We're going to get rid of labor protections because we want to be able to use and abuse our employees. They were successful. So the 80s came along, and the Business Roundtable said, we're moving into tax cut territory now. So they got Reagan to extend the tax cuts, the trickle-down economics that failed the economy horribly. And then the 90s came along, they were pushing for NAFTA. That was their big goal in the 90s, give us NAFTA.
And that was so we could go and we could hire cheap labor in places like Mexico and India and China. Now they're saying, why worry about all that? Bring in cheap labor. So what their focus is, just so we don't get too far in falling in love with these corrupt freaks, the Business Roundtable and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, it's all about getting unskilled labor to come into the United States where they can pay them $5 an hour, or the kind of money that Tyson Foods were paying them to work the chicken farms or whatever it is, factory farming, whatever kind of factory farming. They want them moved in. They want to take advantage of them, And then beyond that, they don't really care. Then the taxpayers in the United States have to figure out, okay, how do we deal with this problem? It's the equivalent of them, it's the equivalent of them passing on those liabilities to taxpayers after they've taken advantage of all the advantages from the unskilled labor.
And what we've seen a lot too is that these businesses, they'll absolutely outright warn their workers, these illegal immigrant workers, and they say, listen, yeah, we're paying you below minimum wage, we're working you 15 hours a day and not giving you overtime. Who are you going to complain to? Because if you go file a complaint, you're deported. We've got you, by the ankles, you can't go. Just like what we saw recently happen in Mississippi, where they raided the meat packing plant, hundreds of immigrants kicked out, and not a thing happened to the owners here.
Cheap labor, no liability when they get killed, when they get hurt. Let me tell you who the people are behind this movement so you don't go embracing, oh my God, what a bunch of wonderful folks, and we don't hear this snowflake talk about immigration related as this is something good because corporate America wants it. Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan, Morgan Stanley, Citigroup, Bank of America, Boeing. I could go on forever. The people who make all of the military machine work in this world. The people who every week we're seeing another ugly story about them destroying an entire ecosystem with environmental problems. The very people who caused the burn down on Wall Street where nobody got prosecuted. That's the people behind this. As a matter of fact, if you look at who their go-to people are, all the people you would expect. Hank Paulson, Tim Geithner, Larry Summers, Jamie Dimon. Jamie Dimon, by the way, is now running this roundtable, this business roundtable. And every time I hear some announcer on television, corporate media talk about, oh, isn't this wonderful? This is all about cheap labor.
Yeah.
They don't care about these people. Put them in a factory farming situation. If they cut off an arm, send them back to Mexico. That's their attitude. So that's what this is really all about.
Absolutely.
Senator Elizabeth Warren's making lots of enemies while running for president. And that's actually a good thing for her campaign. I love the enemies that Elizabeth Warren is making. That list that I just gave you, those are her enemies. Was it Zucker with CNN came out and said, we got to stop Elizabeth Warren?
Mark Zuckerberg.
Mark Zuckerberg comes out on Facebook. We've got to stop Elizabeth Warren because she's interested in the antitrust issues for all these social media organizations. And if we're not careful, she's going to get her way. So Wall Street is spending huge amounts of money already trying to make sure that Elizabeth Warren is not the person that ends up in the primaries. Look, there's only two candidates that are going to make it, in my mind, that we could actually live with, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. They're trying to take both of them out. Give me your take.
Well, it's really interesting what's happening. You have the folks on Wall Street, the alleged Democrats on Wall Street, what they are major Democratic donors, and they flat out came out and told CNBC, listen, we are Democrats. We do not like Donald Trump. He is bad for the market. But I promise you this, even as Democrats, if you make Elizabeth Warren the nominee, we're putting our money behind Trump because Elizabeth Warren wants to come in and enforce regulation. So does Bernie Sanders. But while they are kind of afraid of Bernie Sanders, I don't think at the moment they actually view him as somebody that's going to win the nomination. So they're focusing most of their hatred on Elizabeth Warren. The lobbyists are coming out against Elizabeth Warren. Mark Zuckerberg and the social media people, because she said, we're going to break you up and you can't run 800 different businesses and gobble up the small ones.
Let me read what Zuckerberg said. I mean, he holds this meeting with his employees asking them to create this big push against Elizabeth Warren. However they can do it, get busy doing that. Here's what he says. You have someone, this is Zuckerberg, you have someone like Elizabeth Warren who thinks the right answer is to break up the companies. If she's elected president, we got a big challenge ahead of us. So what he's talking about, the reason he's already spending money against her, the reason he's already gaming Facebook against Elizabeth Warren and against Bernie Sanders, the reason he's doing that, the reason Twitter's doing that, the reason Amazon's doing that, is they're worried about a president that might actually do what needs to be done, and that is to break up these monopolies. They're no different than the railroad monopolies that existed in the 20s, are they?
Right. And, you know, especially when you take a company like Amazon, like you just mentioned, what are they? Are they a place to buy goods and clothing? Are they a place that's going to run security systems? Are they in advertising? Are they a military contractor? Are they a cloud computing service? The answer right now is they're all of them. And that's the problem. And they gobble up these smaller companies who come in and do these things, and then they become these, behemoths. And Elizabeth Warren is just simply saying, listen, no more behemoths. We don't need one company running 15 things. How about 15 companies?
Doesn't it freak you out when you see progressives coming to the aid of Mark Zuckerberg? When you say, oh, they can't mess with my Twitter. You know, we can't break up Facebook. We got to, look, let me put this in perspective. Facebook, the fine of $5 billion by the Federal Trade Commission. You remember that? Federal Trade Commission says that you have stomped on privacy issues. You're going to fine $5 billion. That was like big deal. That was a no event for Mark Zuckerberg. Then $100 million from the SEC, where they're sharing information about people that are on site. They're selling it to people. They're giving your information to advertisers so they can make you crazy with advertisers on whether it's your telephone, whether it's your iPad, whether it's your television. So all of a sudden, I don't get it. I don't get this idea where progressives come out and say, oh, social media is so important, we can't mess with Zuckerberg. You've heard that, haven't you?
I have, and it's a lot of it coming from more of the kind of centrist Democrats. They think Zuckerberg is their friend. They think Zuckerberg is, like them, a corporate Democrat. But the truth is, this guy is in it for himself. He will support whatever candidate, whatever party is going to put more money back into his pocket. And there is a distinction here I want to make. The Zuckerbergs, the Wall Streets, they're not afraid of Elizabeth Warren because she may increase their taxes. Believe it or not, they actually don't care about that too much. What they care about is she wants to come in and just enforce the rules that are on the books, because that hasn't been done in decades. It hasn't been done probably since the 70s.
Most viable candidates out there, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, you watch these flying monkeys go after them. They want Biden because Biden is just a repeat of Hillary Clinton. Coming up, how is it that Jeffrey Epstein managed to snag hundreds of millions of dollars in funding even after being convicted of having sex with young girls? He's a pedophile. That and more when we come back. Newly disclosed financial statements reveal that Jeffrey Epstein's company raked in nearly $200 million revenue after he was convicted of soliciting a minor for prostitution. The documents provide a glimpse into the mysterious finances of the deceased sex offender. RT's Brigida Santos joins me now from Los Angeles with a story. Brigida, what can you tell me about Epstein's company, this Southern Trust, where all this mysterious money seems to be rolling in?
Well, Epstein launched Southern Trust in 2012, just years after his 2008 conviction for soliciting a minor for prostitution. It operated out of an office in the Virgin Islands and allegedly worked on developing a DNA mining service to help pharmaceutical companies reduce the need for clinical trials. The company was Epstein's attempt at rebranding himself and rebuilding his business after his previous company, Financial Trust, suffered massive losses in the financial crash and lost its biggest client. Epstein was also trying to rehabilitate his image after registering as a sex offender. Southern Trust ended up earning him nearly $200 million in revenues over a 5-year period, despite all the scandals surrounding him.
Yeah, Epstein had this love affair, and they seem to have a love affair with Epstein with MIT, Harvard, Yale. It's like whenever he asked for money, or whenever they asked him for money, there was always this access that he was able to build, and all of a sudden he's going to be this science guy. But then when you take a look at the interviews that they did with some of these folks involved in these creepy little projects, you understand they all regarded him as a dope. I mean, somebody who had no insight at all into the scientific issues that he was trying to put himself out front on. Who was paying Epstein all this money, Rosita?
Well, that's a great question. It's still unclear. We don't know what kinds of customers Epstein worked with after switching from finance to this new alleged DNA research company. What we do know, based on the documents, is that Epstein likely switched his company's focus to avoid registering with federal securities regulators as required under the Dodd-Frank Act. Now, if financial trust did not manage money, it would not have to register, even though Epstein told officials that the company would still have a financial arm. In 2013, Southern Trust also earned him a 10-year, 90% tax break from the Virgin Islands Economic Development Commission. So he really knew how to game the system, go through loopholes, and make money work for him.
Well, here's the interesting thing. Most of the time, for example, in his law firm, we always want to know who we're doing business with. It doesn't take anything but a little bit of due diligence to find out this man wasn't just accused of one incident. He was a pedophile. For all practical purposes, anybody looking into the story knew that he was a pedophile, knew that he had been given a sweetheart deal by the DOJ for no good reason, understood all the facts that he was having sex with 14-year-old girls, and nevertheless, these science organizations thought it was interesting enough to say, hey, let's listen to him. And you know what? Maybe it's a two-way street. Maybe we get more money from Epstein and we give him money on the back end of it. It's going to be interesting to be able to follow this money. It's also been revealed that Epstein secretly owned a second private island in addition to Little St. James in the Caribbean. What can you tell me about that?
Epstein acquired his second island, known as Great St. James Clay, after tricking the owner into thinking that the buyer was a Dubai businessman tied to the royal family. Now, Epstein did this because the owner of that island did not want to do business with Epstein after hearing testimony from underage victim after underage victim. So Epstein set up an opaque limited liability company to secure the $22.5 million sale. The Dubai businessman whose name Epstein used, that man said that he forbid Epstein from using his name on the shell company, but that Epstein did not listen. Now, even with these new details, the mystery behind how Epstein made his fortune remains.
Well, you know, the real part of this story that's becoming more and more troublesome is it's all of these names that were attached to the Epstein ugly, ugly story. Now, after his death, the media, it's like the typical corporate media. There's not a shiny thing there anymore. They've revealed the names. You know, we've seen Dershowitz, we've seen Bill Clinton, we've seen Trump. I could go on, you know, Prince Andrew. We could go on forever. But all of a sudden, the media is not paying attention to it anymore, and that's where the story is. The follow-up to this story ought to be, why is it that MIT allowed Epstein to give so much money to MIT after they understood that the guy was a hopeless, chronic pedophile that should be in prison? Why did Harvard do that? Why did all these science organizations say, yeah, his money's just as good even after we knew that he was a pedophile? It's still a mystery to me. Maybe you can shed some light on it, Brigida. Why is it that we have a culture that was so accepting of this disgusting pedophile simply because he had some money up front? What's your take?
Unfortunately, money does drive everything, especially at these schools. You know, the former director of the MIT Media Lab said that he would take the money even today, knowing what he knows about Epstein. It seems like they need this money to do their research and they don't care where it comes from.
Yeah. Well, that sure played out itself on the Epstein story, but this is another angle, and that is, where is this mysterious $200 million coming from? Who's keeping Epstein alive after they know that he's a disgusting pedophile? Thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Mike.
Former Dallas police officer Amber Geiger has begun her 10-year prison sentence for the murder of Both and Jean, who Officer Geiger had fatally shot after mistaking his apartment for her own. Back in September of 2018 is when this occurred, but a few wrinkles during court proceedings have raised eyebrows throughout the media. Legal journalist Molly Barrows is here to examine this case a little further. You know, this, honestly, what a weird case.
Yes.
I try, you know, anytime I listen to facts like this, I try to analyze it from both sides. Give me your analysis. It's just a peculiar case.
Well, just to outline the facts for anybody who may be unfamiliar, like you said, last September of last year, she was off duty, but she was still in her uniform. She was headed home to her Dallas apartment complex, heading into what she said she thought was her apartment, but it was a mistake. She was actually one floor off. She lived one floor beneath the apartment that she accidentally walked into, is what she said. And so that apartment belonged to Botham Jean, and she said that the lights were off. He'd been in there watching football. She thought she was in her apartment, and that she shot him because she thought he was a burglar. So it's interesting. They had the guy who lived directly across the hall from the victim testified that he had just met him earlier that day, and he was a nice guy. He'd often heard him singing in his apartment, whether it was gospel songs or, his whatever favorite music was. And he had heard the altercation. He said it sounded like two people who were surprised by seeing each other. And that he heard them talking at the same time, and then he heard the gunshots.
This young man that was shot was a wonderful person by
Yes.
every standard. I mean,
An accountant, educated,
just a wonderful
good
person. So now we're hearing one of the key witnesses in the case that they were actually shot dead while the case was pending. Tell me what you know.
Actually, not while it was pending, because he testified, and it was he was a key witness in the case itself,
All right.
describing who this guy was, like you said, hearing the altercation. So she was just sentenced, but he was shot to death last Friday night outside a different Dallas apartment complex.
Any connections that they're looking at?
Of course, there are rumors. There's talk in the community. The Dallas prosecutor handling his case, and his name is Joshua Brown, basically said that, he was looking into it. Details are sparse, but that he had only praise for Joshua Brown because he spoke up and testified at trial, which he said is often difficult to find someone who will speak up in cases like this, especially when victims are black or it affects the minority community. In this case, it was particularly it sparked protests because you have this white police officer who claimed that it was an accident, and she was initially only charged with manslaughter. She walks into the apartment of, wasn't her place, an unarmed black man. She's being charged with manslaughter, and the minority community was basically like, "You got to be kidding us! What do we have to do to show you that Black Lives Matter too?" Sort of a thing. And so there was a protest, and then she was later charged with charged with murder, and then she was convicted of second degree.
Haven't we seen a lot of that lately? It takes a protest to get the court system to do what they're supposed to do. To get
She
the
was
police,
fired, too.
Yeah, to get the police. She was fired.
Right.
Everything that happened should have happened.
Yes.
But I'm looking at the way the media is handling the sentencing on this. They're saying it's sympathetic, it's forgiving. She's going away for 10 years.
Yeah, she could have gotten 99,
Yeah,
and she could have gotten as
yeah.
low as 5. So
Right.
the family was very pleased, and going back to the sympathy, the compassion, the victims were black, the judge in this case was black, and there was some criticism for the judge because after she handed out this 10-year sentence, she gave the officer a Bible, and the woman asked, Amber Geiger asked her for a hug, and she said she kind of stood there for a second thinking, this is awkward, and she said that she asked her again, and she said at that point I had to decide, is it my responsibility? This is the judge saying this.
Yeah.
Is what she told reporters. Is it my responsibility? She said, I decided then that it was my responsibility to be compassionate as well. And the family had also forgiven her.
This family is wonderful. I mean, you go back and look at the story.
It's heartbreaking.
You got this really, really decent young man.
Right.
Terrible incident that takes place. The family forgives her. An open court goes and hugs her. There's a lot of parts to this story that to me, real quickly,
Yes.
what is her best argument on how this happened? What is it that caused her to go and start firing?
She wasn't drunk. Her toxicology reports came back clean. She basically says she was distracted. The prosecution didn't buy it because they said there were several indicators that should have, made her realize that she wasn't in the right spot. He had a red doormat at his door. She didn't have one.
Had
She
she
said
just
her
finished
key,
a shift?
she had just come off work. That's why she was still in uniform, but she was off duty. And they think that that's partially why the jury was more willing to convict in this case, because had she been on duty, typically juries are less inclined to second guess an officer's decision in the line of work of when they decide to shoot.
Yeah, this
but
doesn't
this,
fall
as
anywhere.
you said,
But
didn't
she had
fall into that.
finished, was it a night shift that she'd finished?
Yes, she definitely.
Okay.
She finished
Come
her
off a
long
night shift, walks in the wrong apartment and opens fire.
Yes.
Terrible story.
Yes.
But I got you. When you watch this story and you understand it, you will love this family. This family.
And
has
as a
shown
former
that-
prosecutor, it's got to make you feel good to see that there is, because usually things like this will destroy a family.
Oh
so
my
they're
God!
trying
This
to
is a
keep that
terrible, terrible, terrible tragedy.
from happening.
Thank you for joining me. Okay.
Yes, thanks, Pat.
Finally tonight, some good news. Last week, lawyers representing the victims of Las Vegas shooting reached a settlement agreement with MGM Grand for close to $800 million. Robert Eglett, who, by the way, I'm going to be going to trial with in Nevada against the opioid distributor. Well, he was the lead attorney representing the victims of the shooting, and he says that this huge settlement should be enough to cover every lawsuit that MGM was facing, which was more than 1,000. The lawsuits against MGM for Las Vegas shooting were the first of their kind. The hotel was accused of negligence for allowing the shooter, Stephen Paddock, to remain holed up in his room for days. They allowed him to use the special service elevators to bring his weapons and his ammunition into the hotel room, and they actually delayed barging into his room to stop the shooting. Never before has a venue like this been held accountable for a shooting, and this could certainly open the doors that victims never knew were even available. That's all for tonight. Find us at Facebook on facebook.com/RT America's Lawyer. Also follow us on Twitter at America's Lawyer.